Hey folks, Max here, and I wish that the gay community was united like we used to be, just arm locked in arms singing Kumbaya! Or at least that's what people on my Twitter timeline keep saying. For better or for worse, many queer folk, young and old, are realizing, wow, this space is very white. Huh, I don't think I've even seen any trans people around here. Can any of you gays even name a woman? Name a woman! No! But then, every so often, there's a comment that implies that it didn't always used to be like this. Hashtag only 70s gays will remember that the gays of yesteryear were more inclusive and cohesive of a community. And I'm gonna give you a couple seconds to figure out why that isn't the case. If you answered because we live in a society, you are correct. And if you're not familiar with society, well, lucky you. But the 70s were not less racist, transphobic, misogynistic, etc. than our present. And spoiler alert, it does not get better when we go back in time. Which is exactly what we're going to do. So, segregation was a thing, and it was not very pog, you'll find. In fact, it was very anti-pog. Some people, typically conservatives, frame segregation as one cajillion years ago. But we've covered histories longer than it here on this channel. Segregation started with the Black Codes in 1865. Basically, oh, you're free to do exactly what we tell you. And the Black Codes were followed by many other discriminatory laws that became double deep fried into Southern law codes, with little pushback from the federal government. Sure, there were some laws in place, but it was more finger wagging versus laws that were actually upheld. Which brings us to the part that most people know about segregation, Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896. Fun fact, Plessy was just pardoned in the year of our Lord 2022. Let that sink in. But if you aren't familiar with the case name, you're definitely familiar with the outcome of establishing separate but equal as the law of the land here in the States. But it was anything but equal, and it was certainly very separate. This is an oversimplification, I know, but bear with me. And talking about bears, this brings us back to the gays! As we know from other historical deep dives, many cities had secret but active gay communities. In fact, those who watched the Bathhouse video may remember the Everhard Baths in New York City, regarded as the first, if not one of the first, gay bathhouses, opened in 1888. Just 8 years prior to the Plessy versus Ferguson ruling. Regardless, they still didn't serve black men, or any men of color that couldn't pass as white, probably. The first establishment, and only for quite a while, that did serve black men in New York City was the Mount Morris Baths, founded in 1920. You may also remember from that video that bathhouses are important meeting spaces for socialization. Many men met boyfriends, best friends, and later on husbands in many bathhouses across the country. So, to preclude black and queer men from these spaces was precluding them from the larger gay community. And circling back to other people of color, I'm not even sure what they did at this time. It's estimated that there were a little under 8k Asian people and less than 200 mixed people with an unknown number of Latino folks. But statistically, there would have to be some queer people in those groups. I imagine they had their own smaller cruising spots, or perhaps some of them passed as white and partied with their fellow white boys. But it's hard to say. The answer's been lost to time. A lot of horrible shit happens from the 20s to 1964, where the Civil Rights Act was passed, and horrible shit continues to happen. But Max, what about Stonewall? I'm glad you asked. The Stonewall Inn was founded in 1934, and like many gay bars at the time, it was owned by the mafia. Hashtag be gay do crimes. Do we even say that anymore? Is that 2012? But they were not segregated, and they had an extremely diverse clientele, as it was one of the only places that gays could dance. But after the riots, 4 years after to be exact, Sylvia Rivera interrupts the 1973 Gay Pride rally with a powerful speech about how the gay men partying had forgotten about their gay brothers and sisters that went to jail and faced great tortures for their rights. Only to be booed.
Y'all better quiet down!
Well, I mean, she gets cheers at the end, but like, there was a lot of booing in the beginning. And let's not get started on the racialized hanky code that popped up later in the 70s. Mostly because I can't find more on it other than an approximate time that it may have surfaced. But that is besides the point. As we continue into the 80s, a time of great strife for the queer community, many people tend to think that we dropped our differences and all came together for this common cause against AIDS and HIV. And while I'm sure that's true for certain groups of people during this time, that was not the case across the board. In DC, many predominantly white gay clubs still turned black people away. Which Sounds nuts when you think about it until you realize that the Civil Rights Act was only passed 16 years ago. But also, it was passed 16 years ago! But that ignorance never dissipated. In fact, it was just emboldened by new stereotypes in the face of the crack epidemic. But this led to a group founding the Enik Coffeehouse, a black LGBTQ coffeehouse that appeared for black artists to collaborate, work on projects, and perform. If you want to learn more, they are actively making a documentary about this important place that was unfortunately gentrified out of existence. Which is funny, not like, haha funny, but like, white people really were the beginning and the end of this business. Looking to the 90s and early 2000s, we can see the difference between Man's Country versus Steamworks in Chicago, and let me be clear, Steamworks does not, and has never, to my knowledge, had specific rules against people of color, but it is reported that more working class folks and men of color went to Man's Country, while the younger, whiter crowd went to Steamworks. All the more tragic when they went out of business and were turned to do luxury apartments. I'm sensing a theme. Even though many of the gay establishments across the US that excluded BIPOC folk are no longer in operation, no one really wants to remember their favorite bar as a spot that suspiciously had no black people because they weren't allowed in. And that's the problem. That's why this video was so difficult to make. I would have not even found what kicked this line of thinking off if I didn't continue searching for a particular history site. Notice how Everhard's article admits that they were whites only. I understand that this is a shitty part of American history, and so is like most of it, but that doesn't mean we should gloss over it, or we're just gonna keep glossing over it, even when it happens in our present day. Which, you guessed it, brings us to present day. In some ways, things are better. In others, there's the same. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that there's no law segregating the races, pretty pog, but demographics haven't changed a lot in certain areas, and when they do, the neighborhood was either gentrified or a highway was placed there. +1 to infrastructure. So even though there are no laws segregating us, we are still more or less segregated. But what about our bars and other gay spaces? Well, while requiring more forms of ID for black patrons or straight up turning us away is out of vogue, there are other ways to ensure that your business has a certain type of clientele. Some modern bars use racialized dress codes to deter black patrons, things like no hoodies or Timberlands for you white folks out there, as well as higher than normal covers. Like, I get it, your bar needs to stay open, we're on the same page. I want there to be queer spaces for me and my friends for decades to come. Though $20 cover is a little much, diva, and it disproportionately affects poor queers, which is like most of us. But I digress. As a community, we are the LGBTQ+ community, but bi folk are routinely alienated, and trans folk, particularly trans women of color, murders are only paid lip service, while year after year, the numbers of murders continue to rise. Which, I suppose I'm paying them lip service. Let's donate to the Trans Law Center. And by let's, I do mean all of us. So if you could, that would be awesome. But none of this is to say that there's been no progress or this has been a hopeless fight. As I demonstrated, these issues have always existed, but now folks are bringing them to light, and we need to keep fighting and looking forward and not romanticize a past that never existed. Remember to like, subscribe, and ring bell. As always, my links are in the description. I hope you have a great rest of your day or whenever you're watching this. Okay, bye!